Hello and welcome to this overview of the AgileBA, the Agile Business Analysis Practitioner practice paper. In this session, I'm going to take you through how the paper looks and how the questions are formatted, so you can at least get a better understanding on how to approach the question style initially. Because there are three areas you need to look at. One is the question style itself, the way the questions are laid out. The second thing is understanding how to read through the question and analyze what the question is about and what they're looking for. And then the third one obviously is understanding the methodology and picking out the actual answers, because you have the answers there. But once you understand what they're looking for within the question itself, then you have a better understanding of where the answer is. It's always a good idea to have at least some idea in your head what you think the answer might be before you even go and look at them. It causes a lot less confusion, as you will see. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through how the paper looks in a framework and give you some understanding of the structure of the paper, both the scenario and the question booklet and the questions themselves, and how to approach the questions themselves. So what I would like you to do is to make sure that before we start this, put the pause on, that you look and make sure you've got your practice paper ready that is provided with the course, which looks a bit like this. I have a printed copy format. You might have it online or as a PDF. And what I'm going to explain is how the major sections of the question paper look. Okay, so firstly, you are presented with two papers. The first one looks like this, which says Scenario Booklet. And it has a code on it, and it will say Scenario Booklet. In this will be the scenario plus some additional information that you will have that the questions are based on. Now, bear in mind, not all questions will need you to look at the scenario directly to answer them. And I'll explain that as we go through the framework of the questions. Right? And then the other booklet you'll get will be this one, which will have on the front of it the question booklet for the exam. And on the inside page or the inside sheet, it will say syllabus areas covers. Now, it's always the same for. They might not be in the same order as they are for your practice paper, but always in the same order, same questions. Business analysis foundations, business analysis fundamentals, strategy and organization, practices and requirements. Okay, it's always the same for, might be just a different order. I'll go through the question booklet in a moment. So what I want you to do is have a look at the scenario booklet first, and then we'll go through the makeup of this, because there are two sections to the scenario booklet. The first one, when you open the paper or the form, you will have what's called the main scenario. So you'll see this main scenario. Now, it could be more than one page. This one goes over a few pages. Make sure you know at the bottom it says continue. As it says here, continues on next page. This is the main scenario. This is what the whole paper is based on. Right? Now, my recommendation here is that you skim through this very quickly to have a look at what information you have here. Don't read it in any detail yet. In fact, don't read any detail at the beginning either, and I'll explain that in a moment. Go through this particular paper, and when you open up, you'll find there's more background, you'll have some roles and responsibilities, and there's also a timeline in this particular question. Right? You'll have a timeline. Now, you might not have all this in your live paper. It just depends. Okay? So skim through it very quickly, pick out any obvious parts you see, any numbers, any particular bullet points, make a note of them somehow, either on a bit of paper or if you've printed a copy out to have with the exam, make a note on them with a marker. Right. Then I recommend you read through it, but read through it lightly to get a better understanding about what the scenario is about. Don't go into a lot of detail. Pick other bits out as you go on, as you start to read. The reason for this is that you need to understand what the whole project is about for the question paper, but don't go to too detail, because some of the questions will refer you to read the project scenario, and then you can read it in more detail from the perspective of that particular question's syllabus area. So if you're doing practice around time boxing, for instance, or facilitating workshops, you can look through the paper, through the scenario, and pick out the information relating to that particular question. But you need to know what the story is about from the beginning at reasonable level. Don't spend too much time on it. That's my advice. Right, okay, so that's the main scenario. Now, you'll notice that following the main scenario, we have some other section which says question 2, this one says organisation, additional information. Now there'll be one or few of these additional information sheets within the scenario booklet. You do not use these until the question points you to use the additional information. Right? So sometimes it'll be just information in the question, sometimes it'll be used in the project scenario, or the additional information, or both. Right? And I'll point all this out as we go through the questions and explain how they're framed. So only look at the additional information when you need to for the question, and then you forget about it. It's not changing the status, it is just for that question. Okay? If it conflicts with the scenario, you use the information in the additional information because it might be taking you down a different type of path for the moment to say, if this was happening, what would you do? And then afterwards, you're back to the original flow again. So please bear that in mind. Additional information is only for the question it's being used for. After that, you forget about it and you reset to status quo. Right? So this is the scenario for the paper. Okay. The next thing we're going to look at now is the question booklet. So I want you to get the question booklet out and have a look at that. Again, we have the 4 syllabus areas written at the top here. There could be any 4. You do not have to do them in the order on the paper. If you're doing it through electronically, it will flow that way. If you're doing it any other way, then maybe you have the choice. But you can still flick through the system and pick out the ones you feel more comfortable with. Ideally, it's best to just follow through the flow. There's no linkage between them. There's no linkage between any of the individual questions either. Right? They're all independent questions. So, what I'm going to do now is take you through 3 or 4 of the different frameworks, the different styles of question we have in the paper. So I'm going to refer you to a question on the paper and explain how it works. You're not going to get the answers or read it. I'm just going to explain how the question works. So I'd like you to turn to the first page, which has question 1, part A, and it has the number of marks, 6. Now all questions are framed this way. They'll have the syllabus area at the top, then they'll have a question information box underneath, and then they'll have the questions themselves further down the page. Okay, so the first bit tells you the syllabus area, your question number, the part you're in, and how many marks. And that marks reflects how many questions you have in the paper. And that's quite important. Okay, how many marks they have in the paper. Right. So therefore you have 6 questions, and you can see in the question box below you have 6 questions or 6 statements. So the way this works is that in the question information box underneath, you'll have the information about the question and how to use it. So in this case, as you can see in bold, it says using the project timeline, which is part of the original scenario, answer the following questions. Okay, about the progress through the life cycle. Okay, so it's going to take you through a few different areas. Some areas will point you to the book, the chapter on modules. Another area will take you to the business analysis side, chapter 1, and some parts will be looking at the roles in chapter 2. So just be prepared, you might be moving around the book quite a bit. Okay, so the bold information tells you need to read through the scenario booklet now to understand and answer the questions. This style also says you take a statement from column 2 and marry it with a statement in column 1. Now there are 2 types of this question. One is once, more than once, or not at all. The other one says once and once only. So in the first statement, you can use an answer from column 2 more than once for something in column 1. Now this is obvious. If there are more statements, or there are a different number of statements in column 2 compared to column 1, then that's going to be the framework. If they're the same number in both sides, check, because it might be once and once only. So if you use A, you cannot use A again for another part of the question. So what you do is you read through column 1, produce a story map, blah, 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 and then you go to column 2 and decide which particular phase am I in the project. Right? So you're looking at a couple of things here. Story map, the appendix at the back of the book will help you roughly when you're likely to use story maps, and then you go to column 2 and decide where in column 2 am I in the process. So that's that particular style, the 2-column style. You're picking one from column 2 to marry up with column 1. Either once, more than once, or not at all, or once and once only. That's one style. If you now turn to the next page, right, this is question 1B with 4 marks. This also says now in the question information box, using the scenario, answer the following questions about most, M-O-S-T. So you're back in the business analysis chapter, and it also says true statements. So be careful. Do not try and confirm these statements in the scenario. You will not find them. They're saying true statements. That's it. They're adding more information for you into the question. Okay. The other thing to note, it says, remember, 2 answers. Now, if you look in the question box itself, you'll see there are 5 answer statements. Right. When there are 5, you have to answer 2 out of those 5, and both have to be correct to be awarded the mark. You get 1 wrong, you get 0. Right? So both answers have to be correct to be awarded the mark. So please remember, and this one says best entries, so be careful when you're reading that. Some might be good, but some might be better than others. So look at the best entries for this particular statement all the way through those questions. Right? And you see there are 4 marks. So this is the 2 out of 5. It reminds you, but do bear in mind when there are 5 answer statements, you need 2. Right? And it will tell you there are 2 here. Right. So that's the second style. Turn over the page to question 1C. Okay. Now, this is what they call the assertion-reason question. You'll have some information in the question information box, as you can see here in bold. That could be just the information itself. It could be project scenario and or additional information as well as. In this case, you've got information here. You do not need to look at the project scenario, but sometimes you might. Now, the point here is you have 2 columns of statements underneath. One column says assertion, the other says reason. The assertion statements are referring to the information above in the question information box. So those statements are about that information. The reasons are purely by the Agile Business Analysis book. Right? So the way to do this, all these statements are individual and independent of each other. And you need to decide whether that statement is true or false, depending on whether it's looking at the information above or by the book. Okay, so you read the first statement in the assertion and decide true or false, and you do that. And the recommendation is to do that all the assertion statements first. Do not look at the reasons yet. Do all the assertions first, read one at a time, true or false, all by themselves on their own. Okay, do all those, and then you ignore those for the moment, and you go back and look at the reason statements, and you do the same thing. Is that a true or false reason regarding the Agile business approach? Only. You're not using the information above at all now. And again, you go true or false. Now you have a set of trues or falses on both sides of your column here. So what you now need to do is decide if I have a false on either or both sides. You then use the grid above, which states if it's true, false, false, true, or both are false, then you use the letter C, D, or E in your answer. So if it's true and false, the assertion is true, the reason is false, you put the letter C. If they're both false, you put the letter E. End of story. You don't need to look at those anymore. The only extra step is if both are true, you then have to decide, does the reason by the book support and explain the assertion for the information you have? Right? So you're going to look at the reason and decide, does that reason support my assertion? And then you use the top 2 entries in the grid above. If they are both true and one supports the other, the reason supports the assertion, you answer the letter A, as it says, and the reason explains the assertion. If both statements are true, but there's no relationship between them, the reason does not explain the assertion, then you put the letter B. But you only need to do those for the ones that are both true. As I said, if they're true, but if there's a false in either or both sides, end of story. There's no explanation or support because one of them is wrong or both are wrong. This is the assertion reason thing. The assertion, answer the statements for the information above, all on their own. Ignore them, then go to the reasons, do them by the book, all on their own, and then marry up the statements. Follow that pattern and it's far easier to answer the question. Okay, so that's 1C. The other type I wanted to take you through is in 1D. Right? There's one other one after this one actually. 1D. Now 1D again has information in the top there. Now when the box has no bold type, it is purely by the book. Right? This one has no bold type. It's not telling you to look at the project scenario and or additional information or other information. It's mainly by the book. Now it will talk about the scenario because it refers to that. So you need to understand, this is why I said at the beginning, it's a good idea to make sure that you understand the scenario in a reasonable level. Okay, so this is purely multiple choice. It's 1 out of 4. You have 4 statements, 1 out of 4. Now, this one's quite interesting because my recommendation here, when you look at the answers, you will see that it's a yes or no answer. I recommend you read the question first, like Freddie Finnegan all the way through, and decide for yourself, is that a correct approach or not, and why not? Right? Because now if you decide yes, you only have to look at the 2 statements in the answer that say yes and decide which one of those statements and the reason behind it fits with yours and fit with the question. Now that last part is very important because you might find yes, blah-de-blah, or yes, blah-de-blah, and both may be true statements, but only one of those statements is referring directly to the question being asked or the statement above. Be careful. Right? Make sure that the one with the reason fits the reason behind the question in the first place, because both may be correct, but only one is right. Right. The only other style that's like that, which is a standard multiple choice question, is 2A. That's same type, sorry, 2B. So go and look at 2B for the moment. Right. 2B. Now 2B says using the additional information. So we have this bold information up there, using the additional information. You need to look at that and therefore understand that, as we saw when we were looking through the scenario, you have some additional information for the organization theme. Right? And you go through these and you look at the entries here, and again it says true entries. So don't try and correlate those to the scenario. You may not find them. They're giving you some extra information in here. And it's talking about lean canvas. So now lean canvas, you need to go to the book in the model chapter, chapter 8, and look at the lean canvas diagram and get some idea, just to have it in front of you to remember by. This is always good practice. When the question looks at a particular topic, open the book at the right topic and make sure you have a good idea about where that is, and therefore gets your brain going. So this one's, again, simple, multiple choice, 1 out of 4, and you put the right letter into the answer sheet. So those are the main different types of question paper styles, and I wish you well. Practice at them well, because once you get familiar with those, it's then just a case of understanding the information within the question. And I wish you well with the practice and the main exam. Thank you.